Alrighty, so in this one, we're going to continue looking at Brezhnev from 1964 to 82, but focusing on the industrial policies of the time. Learning outcomes as previous. So understand the main features of the Soviet economy under Brezhnev. Obviously, this one is going to be basically about understanding the main features of the industrial aspect of it, manufacturing, and then assess reasons for such, and then compare and contrast these policies with those of Khrushchev. Which brings us to industry. So let's take a quick look at how the economy worked, and this is a bit of a review. Basically, the economy was under the control of the Communist Party. When the party met in the congresses, that's when the basic rough outline of what the economy would look like was decided and laid out, hence the 5-year plans. But the government itself was responsible for the day-to-day operation of the economy. So it was the government's responsibility to make the goals outlined in the 5-year plan happen. And they did this with planning departments. And these planning departments would decide the rate of growth that the industries were supposed to be trying to work toward, as well as the rate of growth for farms. These planning departments decided on the prices of the materials, like the raw energy. They decided on the amount of labor, the price of labor, the price of the goods that people would pay once everything was created. And the thing is that people assumed that this method worked because it had been working for the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union did a lot of really amazing firsts, right? You know, first thingy in space, first person in space, so on and so forth. However, by the 70s, there are signs of trouble. Like there's going to be some sort of crisis that they're going to have to try to fix. Now, we can see the signs of this in the 70s now because we have this hindsight. But people really thought that just a few tweaks and it would be fine. And it's not until the 1980s does everybody realize that basically the ship is about to hit an iceberg. If you remember, Kosygin was essentially the prime minister of the country. And as such, he would have been in charge of the government ministries. And so from 1965 to 71, he makes an attempt at reforming the economy to improve it and get rid of a lot of the inefficiencies in the economy. And so his idea, and he had some support from economists within the Eastern European bloc. The idea was to incorporate capitalist management methods to try to mitigate, that is, to make up for the inefficiencies of central planning as economic complexity increased. So there's a recognition that the economy has become more complex than the people sitting in Moscow can really handle. So in order to balance that, then they're going to incorporate these capitalist ideas. That way, the economy can still continue to function well. And so one of the things that was going to happen is that there would be an evaluation of the performance of factories producing consumer goods. And this would then also include ideas about profit. So instead of just having a target that they had to reach, which was the way that the system was working before, each factory, sure, they would have to meet their targets, but they would also have to look at how much you sold. So if you made 5,000 pairs of like baby size shoes and none of them were sold, then there's a problem at this factory. And so the other thing that he was hoping to do is to provide greater economic and institutional independence to managers. So give the managers the ability to make the decisions. So decentralize the control of the economy some. And they would try to motivate managers to achieve higher targets and or innovate. So give them incentives, money, to make them want to go out of their way, to make them want to try new things, to make them want to encourage their workers to work harder. So trying to find a way to incentivize them so that the goods being produced are good and more can be produced and kind of jumpstart, keep the economy going. So one of the things that we know happens is this reinstitution of the central industrial ministries. So rolling back the policies of Khrushchev, that decentralization toward the regional ministries of Khrushchev. So it still needs to be centralized. And this was his attempt at kind of like balancing the needs of the government with the needs of the economy. But at the same time, keep in mind that the decentralization created by Khrushchev was really destabilizing. It introduced even more problems into the system. So Kosygyn's reforms and decentralization took a different form. The idea was to give the managers of the factories, the people who know how their factory works, incentive to work rather than keeping that in centralized. However, despite the fact that his decentralization was different and his economic policies were somewhat different, there was a huge amount of resistance. Resistance came from traditional Marxists who were like, oh, heck no, we are not introducing no capitalism all up in here, but in Russian. So people felt that like they were moving away from the whole ethos of Marxism and what the country was supposed to be all about. Now, the ministers also wanted to push back at some of this, and this is the ministers of the various ministries. Keep in mind that having this position is a really important form of political power and political wealth, and nobody wants to give that up. So what happened is they compromised and agreed that there would be some decentralization, but the government would keep a very close eye on things. So the central government was still essentially in charge. He got pushback from the military-industrial complex. Oh, they were like, oh, you want to increase consumer goods? Ain't no consumer goods all up in here. But, in Russian. And so the military, remember, of course, right, that by the time we get to this point, if you're rolling away from ideology as a source of legitimacy, then the power of the military and the perceived strength of the military is your source of legitimacy. And the military, if you're going to increase consumer goods, then that means you're going to take some measure of investment away from the military. And of course, the industries that produce all of those military goods also don't want you to not pay for stuff and military stuff, because now they're going to lose money and position and influence. So there's a huge amount of pushback. And of course, Brezhnev and Kosygin apparently could not stand each other. Now, remember that Brezhnev wants stability. It's all about the status quo. Kosygyn's reforms are rocking the boat. You have people in government, in the party upset, people in government upset, you have the military upset. And so Brezhnev, once he becomes both the chairman and the chairman of the party and essentially the president of the country, he has 2/3 of the decision-making capacity, basically, of this quote-unquote collective leadership. And so he's able to block Kosygin at all turns, and essentially in 1971 it all kind of belly up a little. Ultimately, these reforms produced new irrationalities because prices were not set by supply and demand. You still have, instead of this invisible hand and supply and demand determining what the new prices were going to be based on the prices of the raw materials or transport and things like this, what you have is a system producing stuff that doesn't truly reflect the cost of production. And so that's going to negatively impact the growth of the economy. You have a hoarding of raw materials. Again, people don't want to let stuff go because they could potentially use it. So because of these irrationalities in the system, what you have is people not knowing when the raw materials they're going to need to make their 5,000 pairs of shoes will come up. So even though they might have materials for 6,000, they're only going to make 5,000. Instead of passing that raw material on to the next person who may need it, no, they hoard it. So again, you don't have materials flowing through the system, through the economic system smoothly and keeping everything functioning. You still have that thing of quantity over quality. You still have quotas being set. And there is no interest on capital, so there's no incentive to keep inventory small. What that means is people aren't earning anything extra on the money that they have. You put money in the bank because the bank pays you interest to keep it there. So you think this is a passive way for you to grow your money. However, there is no interest on capital in this system. So you don't need to sell all of your stuff. You don't need to not spend all of your money buying like rubber for 5,000 pairs of shoes when you can't sell 5,000, you'll only be able to sell 1,000. In a rational system, the idea is if you're making money off of your capital, then what I do is I spend as much money as I need to and not a penny more. That way I'm making money from the things that I sell and money from stuff sitting in the bank. But that way, ultimately, the economy is unable to function under all of the burdens placed on it. You have the problems of the Cold War, the need to maintain security, the need to maintain a strong and well-functioning military, the need to support people abroad. So the government has to spend money on the Cold War. And that means that, money can't be invested to improve the system. There's this arms race in the video in which we talk about the international relations. We'll talk about how it slows and speeds up. But the U.S. is spending huge sums of money on the military, on developing new and deadlier arms. And in order that the Soviet Union doesn't lose this whole Cold War, they have to keep increasing as well. And ultimately, what happens is the U.S. economy is bigger and I guess more robust in many ways. The U.S. still went into huge amounts of debt, but it to fund the arms race, but it was better able to absorb it. We have worsening relations with China. So keep in mind that from the mid-60s, as we've spoken about, you have the Cultural Revolution, this huge wave of nationalism, this threat of forcing this communist revolution on people, whether they wanted it or not. You have demonstrations and actions of Red Guard outside of China. And the Soviet Union shares an incredibly long border with China. And at this point in time, Mao is still alive. And Mao is not liking the way the Soviet Union is looking. And so now they have to spend money to protect that incredibly long border. There is a huge amount of involvement in the Middle East with supporting Syria. They were involved in providing equipment and stuff in the Yom Kippur War, or the Arab-Israeli War of 1973. So, and all of this is costing money. There's the support of North Vietnam. And the thing is that they have to find some way to fund all of this. And if they remove the subsidies that they provided people for, like food and heating and transport, then that would drive prices up, and it would create an incredibly dissatisfied population. And the population is not cowering in fear under Brezhnev as they did under Stalin. So there is still that need to maintain that stability. Whew. There's the Prague Spring, that is the putting down of revolutionary movement in Czechoslovakia in 1968. So the economy is buckling under all of those burdens, and they're having increasing difficulty dealing with it. And we'll see how this compounds until the system collapses in the 80s. There are, despite Kosygyn's reforms, there are no real improvements, because change in the political system is necessary to fix these economic problems. So people didn't realize, or refuse to realize, that it's not the economy so much. The economy is a symptom of the disease of the political system. No, I'm just saying. Capitalism forever! Just kidding. So, but you can't change the political system because there's massive resistance from the political elite. This is where they get their status from. The system that's in place allows them to have influence in a way of life that other people do not. There would be massive economic and social costs, as we will see with Gorbachev, right? Gorbachev attempts to change the political system in order to change the economic system, and the Soviet Union collapses. So by the mid-70s, you have economic stagnation. There are increases in say, salaries, but you have the end of an increases in standards of living. And part of that is because there are no consumer goods. There are very, very few cars, very few refrigerators, very few TVs, so on and so forth. And so the result is the black market. The black market is huge, and it's not just the average people who use it, but everybody uses the black market. They calculated that the black market was about 25% of the gross domestic product of the Soviet Union. A full quarter of the money in the country was lost to the black market. Brezhnev saw 3 5-year plans. So the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th. The bestest of the bestest. Not really. So this one was from 1976 to 1980. And it was supposed to increase consumer goods. However, that didn't really happen. And so what you have, even though the government was reporting otherwise, there is a steady decrease in the rate of the expansion of the economy. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this, but one of them is that this is a mature economy. Because the Soviet Union is a mature economy, you're not going to have these massive, stupendous, like superlative growth rates, right? Now, Stalin was able to achieve near miraculous growth rates, one, because he lied, but really because they were starting from such a low point that it's pretty easy to achieve 100% growth if you start at 1. It's hard to achieve 100% growth if you're already at 100. So this is a mature economy, so it's not going to grow quite as much. However, it actively shrinks. And that's because of all of the stuff that we outlined previous. And then there is this hidebound mentality. There is very little fresh blood in the Soviet system. There's very little innovative thinking at the top level. One, this is all that they know. And because this is all that they know, it provides the limits of where they're willing to expand to. So whenever somebody started something new, like Kosygin, like Khrushchev, people were like, ah! And brought it down. As a result of the previous, by 1980, there is crisis. And when we talk about Gorbachev, it is this crisis that he is going to attempt to fix, right? So by the time we get to 1980, the growth of the growth national product had fallen to 2.2%. Industrial growth had fallen to 2.6%. Agricultural growth was down to 0.8% a year. So the targets that were set in the 10th five-year plan, not being met at all. And in a way, they're not even attempting to meet them anymore at all. And so, problems. However, there are still some achievements. For example, as mentioned before, the Soviets were the first ones on the moon, so that's in 1970 and 1971. They have space probes on the moon. They placed a vehicle on the moon in the same year, and they put the space station into orbit and cosmonauts into space in 1971. They have a space probe that landed in Mars, and so on and so forth. So the economy is able to produce some stuff. They also produce the Kalashnikov. Yay, guns! But the thing is that a lot of those achievements, like the space stuff, was definitely a salve for national pride because of some of the limitations. All right, so we will pause there looking at the economy and watch the rest.